Hi there, back again, and this is now the video that I intended to make when I actually made my last video. What I meant to do in my last video was introduce you to some of my favourite introductory astrology books, and instead I went off on a kind of a ramble about how I got into considering astrology a viable psycho-spiritual discipline. And that was all very interesting, so I just let myself ramble. And but rather than ramble on and on and on for about an hour, I thought I'll split the video in two. So this is the second part, and I am going to share with you in this video my favourite introductory astrology books. Now, why am I doing this? It's because my forthcoming series will involve a bit of astrology. It's not about astrology per se, and it's not only going to include astrology, and it's not only going to include tarot, although tarot will be included in it as well. It's actually going to mix together a bit of astrology, a bit of tarot, and a bit of another discipline. It's going to be, I hope, a way of helping you to access, in a fairly straightforward way, the information about yourself, about your soul, you might even say, that you can find from your astrological birth chart, even if you're not an expert, or even an amateur expert, or an amateur in astrology. Anyway, we'll get to that in the fullness of time. What would help you is if you had a copy of your natal birth chart, your natal horoscope, and you can get that at astro.com. I'll put the link below. You just put in your details and it will pop up a very pretty looking chart, which if you have not done this before, you might look at and think, I've got no idea what that means. It might look very complicated. It does not matter. Simply save the chart, print it off if you like, and we will get to all of that in the fullness of time. This video is about introductory books that might also help you with your understanding of astrology if you're interested in exploring it beyond the kind of sun sign stuff that you see in the newspapers. So my first three books are actually not specifically astrological books, or well, two of them kind of are, but in a very broad sense, and one of them isn't at all. The first one is a book that helps us, or could help us to, if you like, hold a frame of reference in our minds that allows us to consider that astrology is indeed something that is possible. The thing about astrology is that if you look into it, even if you are somebody who accepts, for example, that tarot might be a viable psycho-spiritual discipline, even if you don't believe that the way that the cards fall has any particular relationship to real life or real world events or your inner world, and what's happening is you're projecting meaning onto the cards, and that's an interpretation of tarot that I'm very comfortable with, so I think it's entirely valid. With astrology, it's a bit harder because you've got a horoscope which shows where the planets are in relation to Earth at the time of your birth and in relation to you based on the place of your birth, and it shows what signs they're in, it shows what houses of the horoscope they are in, etc, etc. And all of those things have meaning, and so of course different people could interpret those meanings in slightly different ways. But in some ways astrology is a bit more like a language. So different astrologers, although they might interpret things slightly differently, are probably going to come up with quite similar definitions for Saturn in Gemini in the 10th house. It's not going to be wildly different if you've got astrologers who know what they're doing. And that's kind of true for tarot readers as well, of course. If you get a tarot reader who is looking at what the magician means in relation to your future career prospects, then probably different tarot readers would have quite some similar interpretations. But it feels to me there's a bit more room for variation, because a lot depends on the type of deck, the artwork on the deck, a lot depends on the system you're using, etc, etc. With astrology, it feels like it's a bit more of a language, and therefore it becomes slightly more difficult for us to rationalize it away if indeed it works, because how is it then that these planets that are in the heavens, how is it that they relate to us and the meanings of our lives and so on? So the first book that I'm sharing with you is this one, which is called Why Materialism is Baloney. And the reason I'm sharing this book with you is it's a really interesting book. It's written by a chap called Bernardo Kastrup, and in it he basically examines the notion that we probably have pretty much adopted in our culture, that we are material beings in a material universe, and somehow that consciousness has sprung out of this material substance that we are, this physical thing that we are. And he posits that in actual fact, if you really look into it, and he's not in any way denying science and the laws of physics and, you know, gravity and all that kind of stuff, but if you really look into it, it is it's actually as valid to think that it's the other way around. That in actual fact, materiality, the so-called apparent physical world, exists in consciousness rather than consciousness existing in the world. And the moment you adopt that worldview, all of a sudden, synchronicity and astrology and anything that has a synchronous kind of relationship of meaning becomes perhaps a bit easier to believe in and understand. So why materialism is baloney looks at that concept. The subtitle is How True Skeptics Know There Is No Death and Fathom Answers to Life, the Universe and Everything. And I'll read you what it says on the back of the book. I might need to go and get my glasses in a minute because, in fact I will. I'm going to go and get what are, I have to tell you, the most hideous reading glasses you have ever seen. So brace yourselves. These reading glasses I got really cheaply on Amazon. I've got about 5 of them because I had this brilliant idea. I'm always losing my reading glasses when I need them, and I thought these are so cheap. You can just, you know, you type in what your magnification level is, and mine isn't too great. So I mean, it's not too high, so I don't have to get kind of prescription lenses or anything yet. So you type in your magnification thing, and you can get these glasses, and they're very cheap. So I thought, well, since I keep losing my reading glasses, I will buy multiples of these glasses and I'll be able to have a pair in every room in the house. So I did that. I got these multiple glasses, and now of course what tends to happen is that all 7 pairs of my glasses end up being in a particular room of the house. So I'm still running around like a blue arse fly trying to find them. Anyway, here are these hideous, look at those. I look like a serial killer from the 1960s. Anyway, see, I've even lost my book. I can read it now though. The present framing of the cultural debate in terms of materialism versus religion has allowed materialism to go unchallenged as the only rationally viable metaphysics. This book seeks to change this. It uncovers the absurd implications of materialism and then uniquely presents a hard-nosed, non-materialist metaphysics substantiated by skepticism, hard empirical evidence and clear logical argumentation. It lays out a coherent framework upon which one can interpret and make sense of every natural phenomenon and physical law, as well as the modalities of human consciousness without materialist assumptions. According to this framework, the brain is merely the image of a self-localization process of mind, analogously to how a whirlpool, excuse me, while I put my teeth in and reboot my mouth. According to this framework, the brain is merely the image of a self-localization process of mind, analogously to how a whirlpool is the image of a self-localization process of water. The brain doesn't generate mind in the same way that a whirlpool doesn't generate water. It is the brain that is in mind, not mind in the brain. Physical death is merely a de-clenching of awareness. The book closes with a series of educated speculations regarding the afterlife, psychic phenomena, and other related subjects. Brilliant book. Fascinating book. And this guy's very interesting. There are YouTube videos of him on YouTube, so he's worth looking out. Some interviews. He did a very interesting interview. If I remember, I'll link it below, on the Buddha at the gas pump channel. I'll try and remember to link it. So that's why materialism is baloney. So that's a bit of the worldview stuff. And then there are 2 books which actually take that kind of worldview and allow us to consider it from the kind of metaphysical, astrological perspective. And I think the light on my camera is being a bit annoying, so I'm trying to adjust it. I'm trying to adjust it so that you don't get, I'm trying to lock it so that you don't get, I'm not fading in and out of consciousness. First book, The Waking Dream by Ray Grass. He is one of my favourite astrologers, and Very thoughtful, interesting guy. Again, I'll try and link something of his below because it's worth your while, I think. And this is a book that isn't specifically about astrology as such, but it is about looking at the way that our world is full of symbolic language. So let me read you what it says on the back, you'll understand it then. Wake up to a world of meaning. Almost everyone has experienced extraordinary coincidences, synchronicities so startling that they compel us to reflect on their deeper meaning. This engaging and penetrating book teaches you to decode the symbolic messages hidden in the people, places, objects and events that you encounter every day. Weaving ancient insights with contemporary teachings on sacred psychology, astrology and energy, it forges new links between our personal experiences and the subtle workings of the universe. And just to give you an idea of the kind of stuff that's in it, so chapter 1 is the world as dream, then we have the forgotten language, a landscape of symbols, omens and divination, a personal cast of characters, karma and the law of cycles, life as guru, the way of ritual, the astrological universe, the archetypes within and without, and the songs of dismembered gods. And then chapter 12, symbolism and synchronicity in the new millennium. Really, really interesting. It's just a fascinating book, and in fact, in this book, there is a chapter. I'm trying to find it now. A chapter that relates a bit to what I'm going to be sharing with you. I'm just going to give you a quick preview. Oh, you probably can't see it. No, you can't because the light. Hang on. There we are. There we are. Can you see that? Can you see that? Oh yes. Oh yes. Coming soon. A similar book, Archetypal Astrology and the New Cosmology, is this one, Inside the Cosmic Mind. I can't tell you very much about it yet because I haven't finished reading it, but it is kind of the same idea. It's about looking at, it's exploring the roots of astrology from classical to modern times and discovering that the claims of astrology are entirely compatible with new cosmological thinking as envisioned by postmodern physics and chaos theory. So, very interesting. Weiss, that's Phoebe Weiss who wrote this, proposes that the mathematical basis of astrology and the components of astrological charts are both archetypal and cosmic in scope, arguing that the 12 astrological archetypes make up a single cosmic mind whose patterns are imprinted on all our individual minds. So if you want something that gives you an idea of how astrology might work and a bit of a worldview, a valid worldview that you know is seriously debated in philosophical and scientific circles, then those books are well worth looking at. Quickly moving on, I don't want this video to be too long, some of my favourite astrology books as an introduction. Classic, Isabel Hickey, the classic work on spiritual astrology, which is called Astrology, a Cosmic Science. And this is a very good, very readable book about astrology. It's quite new agey in its tone, so there's a lot in here about the dawning of the age of Aquarius and all that kind of stuff, but it takes you through really clearly and really simply and really precisely how astrology actually works. All the information about the signs and symbols, the 12 signs of the zodiac, the planets and their meanings, keywords of the planets, etc., etc., and then it gives you interpretations of each of the planets in all of the houses and all of the signs. So it's what's called a cookbook, where you can, if you know where your Neptune is, for example, if it's in Gemini, well, it wouldn't be in Gemini unless you're very old, because Neptune moves very slowly. So Neptune was in Gemini between the years of 1887 and 1901. So there might be some people still with them. Would there be? Hang on. Let me do my mathematics. Yes, there probably are people in the world, 118, who would have Neptune in Gemini. These were the egos who had strong ties with relatives. Many of them were close to lose relatives in the First World War. New ideas for commerce and concerning trade were born. Neptune in Gemini gives mental sensitivity. Often education had to be sacrificed for the sake of the family. There's a great restlessness and desire for change. Neptune will not return to Gemini until the year 2168. My Neptune, just so you know, is in Sagittarius, because I was born between 1971 and 1985. So anyway, it's all that kind of information. So also things like, you know, if you've got, you know, Aquarius in the 7th house, it's, you know, basically you can interpret anything, any chart you can interpret using this book. Got quite a kind of new agey tone if you like that kind of thing. If you want something that's completely not New Agey and is a bit more kind of traditional in its astrology, then I'd recommend this book, The Principles of Astrology by Charles E.O. Carter, who's not with us anymore, but is a very highly regarded astrologer. I think he was chair of the Astrological Lodge in Britain, or the Astrological Society in Britain for a while. I might be wrong there. He certainly was involved in theosophy, as many astrologers have been, and he gives a very precise account of the way that an astrological chart is erected, and it's very readable. Very readable, quite dry. It's quite a dry kind of type of reading, not fluffy at all. So if you want something that sounds that actually has quite a serious tone, then this is worth seeking out, and you can get it very cheaply second-hand on Amazon or elsewhere. Another book that is great for helping you to erect a chart. Now nowadays, of course, all of that is done by computers. So you can go to astro.com, you put in your details, and a chart will appear, as if by magic. In the old days, people had to sit with ephemerides, which are books that have charts of where all the planets are at different times and years and all that kind of stuff, and they had to work out, based on all of that and doing lots of mathematical calculations, where planets were at a particular time in relation to a particular part of the world. It's quite a complex process. I wanted to know what that complex process was, and even to try it out. So I got this book, Parker's Astrology, which actually allows you to work through the process of erecting a chart manually. Very interesting. Not an awful lot of fun, but it's interesting. It is a lavishly illustrated book with lovely pictures. Let me just stand up so you can see this better. Lovely pictures of the sign. That's Capricorn. And it's got... Oh, that's probably the last one. That was a good one to start with, wasn't it? Come on, Brian. Oh, we're into Cancer now. No, that's Scorpio. Hang on. There we are. Scorpio. Lovely pictures. Illustrating the signs and various other things. Also information about how charts are erected and all that kind of thing. Very, very interesting stuff. And it's got a cookbook element as well. Information about how different planets relate to each other in aspects, as they're called. And at the back it has got that thing what I told you about, ephemerides. And this is information about where all the different planets were at different times. And different dates and everything. Quite remarkable. So that's from 1941 to 1942. Information about where all the planets were at all various times then. So you could erect your chart using this book, and it's also very nicely illustrated, and it's a classic. You could learn almost everything you want to know from astrology from that book. Worth getting. Very quickly, a couple of others that give a complete picture. Alan Oaken's Complete Astrology. Alan Oaken is a kind of theosophical astrologer, and he's written some books other than this one, which take a much more kind of esoteric approach to astrology, and look at astrology very much from a spiritual point of view, and of course all astrology to some extent is spiritual, but looks at things like life purpose and all that kind of thing from a theosophical point of view. But this is a good overview. It doesn't go into too much of the theosophical stuff, and just is a really good overview of all the signs and the stars and how they all work. So it's also got information about mythology and symbolism. So if you look at Saturn, the chapter on Saturn, Light of the Teacher, that's called. It's got information about Saturn in the sky, distance from the sun, all that kind of thing, so the kind of astronomical data, symbolism, mythology and history of Saturn, Saturn in the natal horoscope, so what it means depending on where it lands in your natal horoscope, and various things. So again, you could get virtually everything you needed to know from that book. If you're interested in a slightly more traditional version of astrology, there's different levels of astrology and different types. There's modern astrology, which takes a more psychological approach often and does things like has relatively recently discovered planets like Neptune, Uranus and Pluto. I know Pluto is not a planet, but for astrologers it is. For astrology it is. As are the sun and the moon. They're not planets either, but in astrology they are. It has information about, what was I talking about? Yes, so modern astrology includes the modern planets, the relatively modern planets in rulerships. So you have Pluto ruling Scorpio, say, for example. Before all those planets were discovered, of course, there was the 7 visible planets, the traditional planets. So you had different rulerships. So Mars was ruling Scorpio back then, and still does jointly with Pluto, depending on who you speak to. Anyway, if you want to understand that kind of classical approach to astrology, then Kevin Burke's Astrology, Understanding the Birth Chart, is great. A comprehensive guide to classical interpretation, and it includes loads of information on all kinds of technical sounding things like, well, let me just read to you some from the content so you get a sense. Introduction and History of Astrology, the planets, category and classifications of the planets, inner planets versus outer planets, personal planets, social planets, and transpersonal planets. The signs, the elements of the signs, the modalities of the signs, then essential dignities. That's all about how planets behave in particular signs. So rulership, exaltation, triplicity, term, face, detriment, fall, peregrine, and all these wonderful words that, if you're new to astrology, like me, you would just go, what the actual heck is going on? But it's fascinating. Information about basic interpretation, the angles, the houses, the part of fortune, the aspects between the planets, looking at natal retrograde planets, eclipses, lunations, and the moon's nodes, all kinds of interesting stuff. Fascinating book, really, really enjoyable. Okay, speeding things up even more quickly now, because that gives you the baseline that you really need. I also love Stephen Arroyo's Chart Interpretation Handbook. This is really written for astrologers, for people who actually do astrological interpretation for a living, but it is a brilliant guide to any birth chart, and it gives a sense of how to synthesize the different elements of a chart. Because if you actually look at a horoscope and you consider things like okay, I've got this planet in this house and it's aspecting that planet in this particular way, then you've got all these different components, but you need to synthesize them into meaning. You need to pull them together into meaning. And this book gives you a brilliant, brilliant system for doing that. Another book I like is this one, Choice-Centered Astrology by Gail Fairfield. You may know that name because she also wrote the book Choice-Centered Tarot. And I love that book, Choice-Centered Tarot. And I also really enjoy this book. It takes a very similar, logical, methodical, very understandable approach to astrology, and it goes through astrology as a technical system, so how you actually go through the process again of writing a chart, but then goes into the more interpretive stuff as well. So another brilliant, comprehensive book, very well written, very readable. You really feel with Gail Fairfield that you are in good, solid, instructive hands. So I highly recommend this book. Choice-Centered Tarot, by the way, was republished as Everyday Tarot. Another book which is worth getting, particularly once you get interested in interpreting your own chart, is a book by an astrologer who is a bit more at the kind of traditional end of things. Not all of the planets that we're used to, like Pluto and so on, had been discovered at the time he wrote this. But his name is, I'm looking to see if it's got what I thought it might do. No, The Key to Your Own Nativity by Alan Leo. And this allows you to really kind of go through the whole of your birth chart and figure out what astrology says about your birth chart. The reason I'm hesitating is I thought that this book had a little worksheet in it which allowed you to pull all the information together, but I might be... it does! Special chart. The Key to Your Nativity. So you put in here your rising sign, your ruling planet, the ruler's house, the ruler's sign, the ruler's aspects, where your sun is, where your moon is, where your Mercury is, all that kind of stuff. And then you put the planets, you put the paragraph numbers of where the information is. So once you fill this special chart in, and it doesn't cover everything, it really covers mainly moon, sun, Mercury and all that. The book covers more than that, but this chart covers only certain things. You then put the paragraph number so you've got an easy reference to your own natal chart. So it's an old-fashioned book, but very, very readable and very interesting. Key to Your Own Nativity, Alan Leo. Now, this next bunch are slightly more advanced than introductory, and I suggest that you come to them after you've done your initial reading. These are all books that I actually got quite early on in my astrological journey and enjoyed, but found that I've really enjoyed them more when I've come back to them a second time. Making the Gods Work for You, The Astrological Language of the Psyche by Carolyn Casey. She writes in a beautiful, beautiful way, and I really enjoy the kind of the way that she describes things, and what she effectively does. This book has a funny smell. Sorry, not even a nice smell. I think this book has been in one of these bookshops where they've got a horrendous air freshener. You know, these kind of air fresheners that just puff out noxious fumes constantly. I cannot abide them. They are the bane of my life. I feel like pulling them off the wall whenever I see them. This book has been near one of the air fresheners. This is a replacement copy for one that I had before but spilled coffee all over it. I'm looking for Visionary Activist Principles. These are principles of well, they're an approach to Caroline Casey's astrological thinking, and I love them. Principle 1, or rather Principle 0, believe nothing, entertain possibilities, therefore everything hereafter is offered playfully. I love that. Believe nothing, entertain possibilities. Be open-minded, in other words. Principle 1, imagination lays the tracks for the reality train to follow. I'm not going to explain all these, they're explained in the book. Principle 2, better to create prophecy than to live prediction. What makes us passive is toxic. What makes us active is tonic. This is the difference between predictions, which make us passive, and prophecy, which is active co-creation with the divine. Principle 3, the invisible world would like to help, but spiritual etiquette requires that we ask. Help is always available. Operators are standing by. Principle 4, the only way the gods know we're asking for help is ritual. Principle 5, if something's a problem, make it bigger. I think that means amplify the issue so you can deal with it. Principle 6, we only possess the power of an insight when we give it expression. And Principle 7, creativity comes from the wedding of paradox. We aspire to be disciplined, wild people who are radical traditionalists. Wonderful, thought-provoking, interesting book. These three books are by, I'm nearly there. These three books are by my favourite astrological writer, Rob Hand. Horoscope Symbols, which is his overall how astrology works and what the whole thing is about book. Planets in Youth, which is kind of targeted at young people, so it's about how young people's charts are interpreted, but it works for any birth chart. So if you want Rob Hand's view of your birth chart, this is the book. And then a book that is considered a classic of his, almost every astrologer has it, Planets in Transit. And this looks not specifically at the natal planets, but at the way planets transit. For those who don't understand or don't know this, you have your natal horoscope. It's like a blueprint. Your natal Sun, your natal Moon, your natal Mercury, your natal Jupiter, Mars, Venus, etc., etc., they all stay where they are always because it's a snapshot in time. Obviously, in reality, the planets continue to whiz around up there. Transits are about when one of those whizzing around planets, if it was mapped onto your birth chart, intersects with planets on your birth chart, which are staying still. So your natal Venus might be aspected by your transiting Venus, or your transiting Moon, or your transiting Mars at some point, and that interaction has a meaning. And that meaning is how astrologers make predictions or figure out what issues you're dealing with at the moment. And this book is all about what the transits to your natal planets mean. With these two books, you could interpret any birth chart and do a bit of predictive work. With this book, you'd get a brilliant understanding. This is one of the first books I read on astrology. I read it too soon because when I got it first, I read it and thought, I've got no idea what he's talking about half the time because it's all just too advanced for me. I needed to read some of the more basic books first. Then I came back to this, and I would say now this is my absolute favourite book. If I was stranded on a desert island and told I could take no astrology book but one, this would be the one. But I wouldn't recommend it to you as a very beginner's book. Give yourself some grounding first. And then my final book, because my channel is so often about astrology, it's so often about tarot, and because there are links, And for those of you who maybe have thought about dabbling in astrology but are really interested in tarot and this is all a bit new to you, there is a book that is worth getting if you want to start to get a sense of astrological language and understanding, and that is of course Terral and Astrology by Corinne Kenner. It's illustrated by the Wizard's Tarot, which I have got speeding its way to me. I have ordered a copy of the Wizard's Tarot. I had a bit of a splurge recently. I'll do a video on my deck splurge soon. The Wizard's Tarot is coming. Wonderful images on the Wizard's Tarot. This is a great book. It looks at how astrology intersects with tarot. Clue is in the name. Terral and Astrology by Corinne Kenner. Very, very well written, entertainingly written. For example, did you know that the Three of Cups represents Mercury in Cancer? You probably did know that the Tower represents Mars, or is connected with Mars. Strength, of course, represents Leo. So it gives you an idea of which cards relate to which signs, and which cards relate to which planets, and which cards in the minor arcana represent the planets in signs. Quite complex. Not really, but it sort of is once you go into it. Anyway, I'm going to stop now because this video is getting on a bit longer than I expected it to, but I hope you've enjoyed that. That is my canter through introductory astrology books. You don't need them all. You do not need them all. Pick the ones that sounded like they were of interest to you, and I think you'll have a fascinating and fantastic journey ahead of you. And I hope that we will have a fascinating and fantastic journey ahead of us when I get my series off the ground. When it comes, I'm looking at my whiteboard. I've got things on my whiteboard. Should I give you a preview? Can I give you a quick? Oh, let's go past my wall hanging. Oh, what's that? What on earth? Oh, I think that's quite enough. I think that's enough for you to see for now. Okay, that was a preview. Those were my favourite introductory astrology books. And this is Brian. Before I become delirious with tiredness and hunger, because I am actually very hungry now, I'm going to go and wish you all a very good evening, morning, afternoon, night, whatever time it is with you. Best wishes. See you soon.